Hi there everybody, and welcome to this final lesson in our series of lessons on using Google Sheets. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at inserting charts and graphs. Now, we're not going to play around with some of the more traditional charts and graphs like bar charts and pie charts and line graphs. We're going to look instead at some of the more unique features of charting that Google Sheets can offer you. All that you need to get started in this lesson is some data in a Google Sheet that you would like to represent in pictures, in a chart or in a graph. Let's get started and see some of the unique features that Google Sheets offers you in this regard. Now, I hope you remember from last time, this is our table of data that we were working on in terms of the amount of money that each country in the world spends on primary and secondary education. And I'm going to be using some of the data inside this table, specifically country and their average educational spend, remember, as a percentage of GDP. But to make things simpler for us, I'm going to just copy and paste some of this data into a new sheet. First of which is the country data. Open up a new sheet there. And the second bit of information that I want is the average educational spend that these countries have made in secondary and primary over the last decade or so. Copy that data. And I want you to notice something. Can you see that we get an error? Do you understand why we're getting that error? Well, because I've copied that data from sheet 1 to sheet 2, and that data was all formula-driven, not value-driven, this sheet is expecting to be able to calculate the values using the same formula. But all the other data on which that formula was depending isn't available. And so that's why we're getting that error. It's trying to divide by 0. Let's take a closer look at why. It's trying to find the average of E2 to AF2. But you can see that there isn't any data in those columns. So it's got nothing to calculate on, hence the error. But thankfully, there is a really nifty way that we can get around this problem. We can, instead of pasting the values and the formula as they were in sheet 1, we can just paste the values into sheet 2. Let me show you how to do that. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to undo this pasting effort here. Just check that my data is still being copied. I can tell that it's being copied because it's got that blue dotted line around it. When I go back to sheet 2, if I go into the edit menu, I can use this feature here, paste special. And I'm just going to paste the values. So now it's not going to try and calculate anything. It's just going to copy the values as they were in sheet 1. But you can see that it's got lots of decimal points here, so I'm going to get rid of those decimal points. Now, the next thing that I want you to notice is that when we want to plot data as a chart or a graph, it's always essential that that graph is marked in some way so that we know what the data that we're representing in that picture actually is. And the best way to make sure that you've got the data you need is to always put column headings to your data. So let's do that now. This is obviously country, and this is average education spend, and that is as a percentage of GDP. Now we know exactly what data we are working with. Okay, it's time now to start representing this data as a picture, a chart or a graph. But one of the really wonderful features that Google Sheets offers you is the ability to chart stuff as a map. And I think that the map chart suits this data really, really well, because what is it? It's a list of countries and their education spend. So let's see how we can do that. The simplest way to insert charts and graphs is to select the data that you would like to represent as a chart or graph as your first step. So we've got all our data. And then from the Insert menu, select the Chart function. Now, what Google Sheets is doing here is it's suggesting some recommended charts. So it's got here What's this? This is a bar chart. We've got maybe a vertical bar chart, but none of those are really the charts that I'm looking for. So I'm going to go into the Charts tab here and down to Map. And I want to select the Map chart. As you do so, a preview of what the chart will look like will appear on your screen, and you can see that it's now plotting all the data, or all the countries for which we've got data on this map of the world. But we can also customize this somewhat. Some of the things that we can customize, the background color to the chart. So we could choose it as blue, representing the sea. Not so nice, let's put that back to white. We can also select if there's a region that we would like to focus on. Perhaps we want to focus on just Africa or just Europe. But actually, I want to keep this as a chart of the entire world. And then finally, we can select the scale of colors that Google is going to use when plotting this world map. Minimum value or low values, it's representing as red, and high values, it's representing as green. And then it's going to shade all the values in between depending on the value of the data at hand. Now, obviously, you can change these, and we can say, well, we would like from sort of a light blue, medium is that blue, and high educational spend is a dark blue. That might be better. Or we can select any other color range that we like. Finally, it's asking you what color you'd like to use for no value. Perhaps there we can select a red. So red countries, no value. I think that looks a little horrible. So again, I'm going to set that back to white. Now that we've customized our chart, it's time for us to insert this chart back into our Google Sheet. One-step approach. All that we need to do once we're done is to click on the Insert menu, and that is going to insert our chart onto our sheet. There it is. Now I want you to notice something. If you click on the chart, you get some additional options here at the top. I want to deal with this one first. We can go back into the advanced edit. That's exactly where we came from. But there's some other options available here. We can delete the chart. We can save the chart as an image. So this is quite useful if you want to save an image to put into, say, a Google Doc or a Google presentation. We can publish the chart so that this chart then becomes a web page on the internet that other people can look at. We can copy the chart, and we can move the chart to its own sheet. If you move your mouse to the top of the chart, you get that hand icon, which will allow you to move the chart around within. Oops, let's try that again. Remove the chart around within the sheet that it's currently on. And then here are some other options. Quick view mode and a quick edit mode. Basically, it gives you some of the functions that are available in this drop down here. Now, I'm sure you'll agree that in a list of data measuring the amount of education money that countries spend, a map of the world with color gradings for each country indicating how much money they spend is a really neat way to represent that data. Now, to close this series of lessons off, and this lesson in particular off, I want to show you one final kind of chart that I don't think any other spreadsheet application anywhere in the world will give you access to. And it's a motion chart. And really what you need to understand about motion charts is that it will allow you to plot the change in data over a period of time. Now that period of time could be years, could be months, could be days. In our example that we're going to use, that change in time is over the course of years. Let's take a look. Now I've pre-prepared some data for us in this spreadsheet here. And again, we're looking at education spend. And in this case, I would like to compare the change in education spend between Finland, which is often regarded as one of the best education countries in the world, and our own country, South Africa. And what have I got here? Well, I've got year from 1999 to 2007. And can you see how I've had to set my data up? Because I want to track the change in values over time, I need to have a line for each year against which I'd like to track. And you can see that I've got exactly the same years in place for Finland as I do for South Africa. So the first column of data is GDP per capita. And really all that that measure is to take the country's total GDP, so take the total value of goods and services and transactions done in that country over a year and divide it by the number of people. And that's a very rough measure of the wealth of a country. So in our case, you can see that Finland is, by this measure, a far wealthier country than is South Africa. In the next column, I've taken our average primary education spend as a percentage of GDP. And in the final column, I've done a very quick calculation to get that education spend per person over the number of years. So those are the years for Finland, and these are the years for South Africa. Once again, all my columns have a heading, so I know exactly which data is in which column. And now I can start the process of inserting my chart. So I select all the data that I want to chart, insert, chart. And in this case, you can see that Google has actually recommended for us the motion chart. Just one thing I didn't point out in the last chart is this toggle here, use row 1 as headers. Remember I told you that it's often a very good idea to put header data in your data so that you understand what data is in which rows, in which columns. So in this case, we're going to select the motion chart. We're not going to go through to charts because we already know which one we want to select, but now we can start to customize it. Now, on the y-axis, Google has selected primary education spend, and on the x-axis, it has selected GDP per capita. But if I click on that, I can select any of the others that I've got in my data range. But I like GDP per capita on the x-axis and the percentage of GDP spent for primary education on the y. Now we've got some other options here. Color. Well, we can select how to represent some of our other data perhaps as a color. We can represent the per person spend maybe as a color, or we can simply say that every dot must be the same color, or Google must select unique colors, which is what I'm going to do here. Then we can also change the size of the dot, and in this case, I'm going to try the per person. Now what we can do is we can actually see a profile of what our motion chart will look like by simply clicking here on the play button. And we can see that as this scrolls through time, so we can see how things on our graph are changing. All the way through to 2007. Now, the size of the dot didn't really change much for me to see. So I'm going to swap that around, and I'm going to use color instead as my per person measure. And the size, perhaps just we'll use GDP per capita as the size so that the dots are different sizes. But also, I can put on what are called trails for both Finland and South Africa. Let me show you what that looks like in this preview. We can now see a record of where things were at the end of each year in our series of data. And the final thing that we can change here is the speed at which the playback happens. We can make it slower, or we can make it faster. I like it sort of a medium speed, so I'm going to keep it at about that. And finally, insert this chart into our sheet. Now that we've inserted our chart, let's see if we can interpret what that chart is actually telling us. So here's the chart inserted back into the sheet. Just move it perhaps into the center of the screen there. Right. Let's play this. I'm going to play it slowly, and let's see if we can understand what this is telling us. GDP per capita is on the x-axis. The amount of money that the country is spending as a percentage of GDP is on the y-axis. And the color of each dot is going to change from blue to red as more money per person is spent on education. So let's play that out. So we can see that GDP for Finland is certainly increasing all the time. GDP for South Africa is not increasing as quickly. But this dot here, the color of this dot, can you see that this dot is gradually progressing through green, yellow, orange into red, indicating that Finland over the years is spending more and more money on education per person. Let's do exactly the same thing, but put the trails on so we can see the history of what's happened. Right, so we can see that in this period, Finland is spending a little less, but its GDP is growing. South Africa is spending a little less. Its GDP is growing slowly. 2001. Oh dear, there's quite a big decrease in education spend in 2002. 2003, it starts to go up. 2004, it's going up quite quickly. 2005, it continues to accelerate. 2006, we see a slight decrease. And 2007, the trend seems to be a continual decrease. And you can see that from the first dot to the last dot, the color isn't as dark blue as it was. It is starting to migrate up the spectrum. But let's have a look at Finland. Can you see that for Finland, Finland started out in this region over here, about $4,000 per year per person, and it quickly got towards the end, 2007, to being the highest value here, more than $6,000 per person per year on education. Now, there's probably a lot that we can read into that chart that we maybe shouldn't do because we're not experts in understanding these kinds of things. But I really just wanted to show you the power of that kind of chart that Google Sheets does offer you. Because what it does is it tells the story inside the data in ways that many other charts can't do. Well, I hope that you have enjoyed this lesson and in fact this whole series of lessons on using Google Sheets. I really do encourage you to get some data in a Google Sheet and to play around with all the other charts that are available. The process of inserting charts in each case is exactly the same, but the story that each chart tells of the data on which it is based is sometimes quite different. So, until I see you again, have a wonderful time. Bye-bye.